The answers you seek, young pilgrim, are back at the beginning. Ah. Instructions can be... It's your fault. Come here! Kitty cat! Kitty cat! Kitty cat! Introductions are the most important part of a paper. Papers are very much like people you meet at a party. If the first discussion isn't all that interesting, you're going to be off somewhere to the snack table loading up on cheese puffs. Yeah. It really works, though, I think. Normally, introductions are the place where we get to know new people and we garner our first impressions of them. When it comes to writing, it's the same kind of thing. Introductions give the first impression to the reader, so they're a very, very important part of all of this. I would say they're probably the most important part of the paper because you need to set up your expectations, you need to set up your claims, you need to set up everything for the reader and do it right away. If the reader is not with you by the end of the introduction, they're probably never going to be with you. So getting it right is important. What an introduction is supposed to do, it's supposed to do three things. First, introduce the subject of analysis. Let us know what the subject is and give us enough information to situate ourselves. And this should be what the majority of the introduction is about. If you have 5 lines about something else, then your subject only comes in the thesis, probably not the best constructed essay. I want to know what your subject is, and I want to know something about it. The second thing an introduction is supposed to do is to hook the reader. I need to be interested. If I'm not interested, I'm not going to pay all that good of attention to the rest of the paper. If your introduction looks boring, I'm going to expect the rest of the paper to be boring, because that's how people read. And this one should seem a little bit obvious, but an introduction needs to clearly state the thesis. We're not writing murder mysteries here. Nobody wants to get to the end to see who'd done it. In academic writing, you lay everything out right at the beginning, and you end the introduction with a clearly stated thesis, your clearest understanding of the argument. You're explicit with this thesis because it sets up all of the reader ideas for the rest of the paper. So, I figure the best way to get into doing an introduction rather than sitting and talking about planning it or anything like that right now is to immediately jump into some examples. These are examples from papers that I used to use as sample student essays for my classes. What I want you to do is I'm going to pull one up. I want you to pause the video, read it, and then try to come to some level of judgment about how good it is. Then restart and we'll talk about it. The first one. You done? Cool. So let's talk about it. The one thing we know that this is about so far is that we know it has something to do with deadheads, people who liked the Grateful Dead, people who follow the Grateful Dead. That much of it is clear at any rate. But how well does this establish an argument? I mean, if this was an all about deadheads, that would be one thing, but we're reading an academic paper, so we want to see where the argument goes. The thesis. The Grateful Dead has one of the most devoted followings of any rock and roll band, and the album Working Men's Dead helped to bring many followers to the subculture of the Deadheads. Now, one thing you need to know about a thesis statement is it sets up everything that you then have to support for the rest of the paper. In other words, it establishes a burden of proof. If you say it in the thesis statement, you have to prove it in the paper. So go back and look at this. How easy would this be to do? The Grateful Dead has one of the most devoted followings of any rock and roll band, which means we would have to compare the Grateful Dead's followings to any other rock and roll band's followings. Easy to do in 4 pages, right? Right? And the album Working Man's Dead helped to bring many new followers to the subculture of Deadheads. How are you going to prove this? Maybe do a survey? I don't know, but it's going to be problematic. The big problem here is the burden of proof is just huge. This is why I say you need to get specific with the thesis statement. Ready for the next one? Take a minute to read this and then write down what your thoughts are. Pause and do that. Okay, welcome back. I think a big problem with this one is it gives you whiplash. We start talking about cultural boundaries, obvious cultural boundaries. So we know it has something to do with cultural boundaries, but we talk about the cultural boundaries on television. We have weird statements about the number of Caucasian shows. What does a show have to do to be a Caucasian show as opposed to a Latino show or whatever? This doesn't really say. The reason is that more and more Americans are accepting each other's cultures. Do we still believe this? This paper was written a while ago where people thought that we were a little bit closer together than we are. Then we get to the end, and it all of a sudden mentions black music. One of the earliest form, and still one of the biggest, of the American cross-cultural phenomenon was music, including music performed by blacks. Until you got to the last sentence, did you have any clue that this would be about black musicians? The paper absolutely, positively lacks focus. No, not that focus. This focus. It establishes something big, huge, and broad, and then tells us, no, that's not really the argument. If you're doing a paper on cross-cultural phenomena, you got to get a lot more specific because you can't cover even a significant amount of cross-cultural phenomena in 4 or 5 pages. The biggest problem with that introduction is that it tried to. It only brought the subject of analysis at the end. But look at the thesis statement again. It still has the burden of proof problem because it's about music, including music performed by blacks. It's not even limited to music performed by African Americans. It's talking about music including that. What are they actually studying in here? Again, they need focus. Ready for number 3? Take a minute, read it, and try to come to some level of judgment. Okay, you back? Well, this one mentions the Z-Boys from Dogtown a few times. We learned a little bit about them. They started to change skateboarding into what it is today, maybe. We know they have an aggressive surf style of skateboarding. But then we get to the however. Whenever you see the word however, it means that there's going to be a change in the level of thinking. Few skaters are aware of them or have even heard of them. Even fewer skaters know anything about the history of skateboarding. After interviewing several skaters about the skateboarding subculture, it was not very surprising that none of them knew who the Z-Boys were. None of them knew very much about the history of skateboarding either. So, is the subject the Z-Boys? No. It's stupid skateboarders. Stupid skateboarders who don't know anything about skateboarding. Look at the thesis. The interviewees as representatives of the current generation of skaters. Well, I don't know if we can prove that you got a real representative sample slice, but they have little awareness of the origins of skateboarding and the people who kicked off the skateboarding subculture. You know what the biggest problem here is? There is no reason to care. Seriously. Why would I keep reading it? These particular people Don't know anything about skateboarding. Okay, yeah. Why do I want to know that? Even if we can prove that they are representative of the current generation of skaters, you're just saying that they don't know anything about the past. Now, this one kind of angers me because people's unawareness of the past is a great subject for possible paper. I mean, it's the kind of thing that I think you could go off on, but they don't. They just say that they don't know anything. Again, no one cares. If you don't tie it to a reason for people to care, no one will. This is why significance is so important in academic writing. I need to know why I'm paying all this attention. And if you can't tell me that it's important and prove to me it's important, then we got problems, people. The three introductions were all chosen for a specific purpose. The first one was chosen to really highlight the importance of burden of proof. One of the things you're doing when you're stating your argument is establishing what you need to do in order to succeed in the paper. This is one of the reasons why I tend to nitpick a lot of people when they ask me about a possible argument, because it's the biggest decision you can make. If you don't succeed on supporting your own terms, the paper is not really doing what it's supposed to, is it? The second introduction was chosen specifically to show you the importance of focus. The writer goes off on this big tangent as if they're one of the people who get distracted by shiny objects. And they turn a corner and, oh, by the way, this is the interesting thing we're going to talk about for the rest of the paper. It should give you whiplash. And it's another sign why introductions are so important, because if you're establishing all of this mood in the introduction, yet then you go over here for the rest of the paper, what are you doing? The third introduction was chosen to really highlight the importance of significance. Why should anyone care needs to be a prime question that you ask yourself. I have a colleague of mine who teaches down in Georgia, a good friend, who tells me that if when he reads a paper, if he gets to the end of it and goes, why should I care about that? If that question appears to him, he fails him immediately. It's something you really should consider early in the process. Why are you bothering to tell us? Why is this worth our time? Writing is really a relationship with a reader, and that involves some level of trust. I'm trusting that you're giving me something that's worth my while. Why would you invest the time in it if you're not going to tell me something that's important? Keep these things in mind as you're looking at your own introductions. Keep in mind the three jobs of the introduction. Hook the reader, which significance plays a large part in that. Introduce the subject of analysis. Focus plays a large part in that. And clearly state the thesis, which is again entirely dependent on burden of proof. Hope this helps. See you next time. Anyway, the three papers for today, the introductions were chosen for a specific purpose. The first one was chosen to really highlight the importance of Anyway, all of the three introductions were designed to teach you a specific thing. I won't say. Anyway, focus is very important. You can't write about everything in the history of the world. It just doesn't work. And it's also important to keep us... Oh, what was the third one? Crap. Secondly, focus. Remember the shiny object principle. And if there's one thing that black music paper did, was it really highlighted how that... The second introduction was designed